He shouted, "I want a divorce," and walked away, leaving her shattered. 5 years later, fate trapped them in the same plane, and what he saw next made him collapse. A child, a secret, and a love he thought he lost forever. Will he get a second chance, or is it too late? Stay with us till the very end, because this story will break your heart and fix it in ways you never imagined. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? Make sure you stay with us until the very end, because this story is full of love, heartbreak, suspense, and moments that will leave you completely speechless. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. Rain poured relentlessly over the skyline, each drop sliding down the glass walls of their penthouse like silent tears from the heavens, echoing the storm inside Layla's heart as she stood frozen in disbelief, her trembling fingers gripping her wedding ring so tightly that the metal dug into her skin. The air between them was thick with tension, heavy with words unsaid, and love long buried beneath pride and silence. Xavier Alden, the man the world envied, the billionaire whose empire stretched across continents, now stood before her like a stranger, his eyes cold, devoid of the warmth that once made her believe in forever. His tailored suit was flawless, his voice steady, yet his words shattered the fragile world they built together. "I want a divorce," he said, each syllable landing like a blade across her soul. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. Even the rain outside hesitated, as though the universe mourned what was being destroyed in that single breath. Layla's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Only the echo of her breaking heart filled the silence between them. She searched his face for a sign of hesitation, for a flicker of the man who once brushed her cheek with tenderness under the same city lights that now mocked her tears. But all she found was emptiness, a void where love had once lived. Her mind flooded with memories. The night he knelt with a ring and whispered that she was his beginning and end. The mornings they shared coffee and laughter before success turned him into someone unreachable. She wanted to scream, to ask him why, but pride held her voice hostage. His indifference cut deeper than any insult could. When he turned away, the soft sound of his footsteps across the marble floor felt like thunder to her ears, final, cruel, irreversible. The scent of his cologne still lingered in the air, taunting her with what used to be comfort. As the elevator chimed in the distance, Layla's world collapsed quietly. She walked to the window, staring at the glittering skyline that once symbolized their dreams. The reflection in the glass no longer showed a wife. It showed a woman betrayed, stripped of illusion, standing at the edge of heartbreak and rebirth. She took off her wedding ring slowly, her fingers trembling as if letting go of it would erase the last 5 years of her life. It clinked softly on the marble, a tiny sound that somehow thundered through the emptiness of their home. "How did we become strangers?" she whispered to herself, her voice fragile yet haunting. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing across the city like the universe itself was bearing witness to her pain. She could still hear his voice echoing, cold, sharp, unfeeling, and it replayed in her mind like a curse she couldn't escape. "I want a divorce." Those 4 words carved scars she would wear invisibly for years. She turned toward their wedding portrait hanging above the fireplace. 2 smiling souls, lost in a promise they thought unbreakable. Slowly she reached up and took it down, her thumb tracing the image of his smile one last time before she set it face down on the floor. Her tears fell quietly, not of weakness, but of farewell. As the night deepened, Layla moved through the house collecting pieces of herself, photographs, keepsakes, memories trapped in glass and gold. Each one told a story of love, that once burned fiercely and died silently. She opened her closet and pulled out a suitcase, her movements robotic, but her heart screamed with every zipper and fold. The city lights outside blurred through her tears, making it look as if the entire skyline wept with her. Somewhere behind her, Xavier paused near the doorway, watching her silhouette pack away, not just her clothes, but every shared dream they ever had. His expression remained unreadable, yet something in his chest tightened painfully. For a brief second, he almost spoke her name, almost reached out, but ego strangled his humanity, and he turned away once more. Layla's reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Her deep brown skin glistened under the dim light, her eyes red, yet burning with something fierce beneath the grief, something awakening. "You will not break me," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm, a declaration to herself and to the universe. She closed her suitcase and stood tall, her spine straightened by the silent power of a woman who had nothing left to lose but everything to reclaim. When she reached for the doorknob, her hand paused, trembling between past and future. Behind her lay the wreckage of love, ahead, the unknown. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and stepped out, each heel click on the marble floor, echoing like a war drum of resilience. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet hiss, and she stepped inside, clutching the suitcase that carried both her pain and her promise. As the doors began to close, she looked up one last time, seeing Xavier standing at the far end of the hall, frozen, staring at her. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. His filled with something unreadable, hers with sorrow and strength. The metal doors shut between them, sealing not just the space but an entire chapter of their lives. In that moment, Xavier felt something stir deep inside, a sharp sting in his chest that he didn't understand. But Layla knew what it was. The first flicker of regret. Outside, the rain softened as if granting her mercy. The cab waiting downstairs seemed like an escape from everything she'd built her identity around. As she slid into the back seat, the city lights painted her face in streaks of gold and silver, reflections of pain and hope. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. "You'll regret this, Xavier Alden," she whispered softly, her voice breaking but her eyes burning with new fire. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror but said nothing. He recognized the look of a woman reborn from ashes. As the cab rolled through the rain-soaked streets, she closed her eyes and saw flashes of their beginning. His laughter, his promises, the way he once held her like she was his entire world. Those memories hurt now, like glass shards under her skin, but she refused to bleed for him anymore. Somewhere deep inside, a vow began to take shape. She would rebuild herself, stronger, wiser, untouchable. She would turn her pain into purpose, her heartbreak into empire. And one day, when he least expected it, he would see her again, not as the woman he broke, but as the woman he could never forget. The city's skyline blurred in the distance as dawn approached, hinting at a new beginning hiding behind the storm. Layla wiped the last tear from her cheek, inhaling deeply, filling her lungs with resolve instead of sorrow. She looked at her reflection in the cab window, the faint outline of a woman who had lost everything, yet somehow looked powerful in her silence. "This isn't the end," she murmured. The cab turned a corner, the streetlights flickered across her face, and for the first time since he uttered those cruel words, she allowed herself to breathe without breaking. Back in the penthouse, Xavier stood alone, staring at the ring she left on the table, the one that glimmered faintly under the dim chandelier. He picked it up, his thumb brushing over the small inscription inside, "Forever, L and X." For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened painfully, a hollowness spreading through him like a slow storm. He poured himself a glass of whiskey but couldn't drink it. His hand trembled too much. He looked around. The emptiness of the room mirrored the emptiness inside him. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint echo of her voice in his mind. As the night gave way to the first light of morning, Xavier sat on the edge of the bed where they once dreamed of forever. The sound of the rain faded, replaced by a haunting stillness that refused to leave. For the first time in years, he questioned his decisions, his pride, his distance, his blindness to the woman who gave him everything. But it was too late. Somewhere across the city, Layla was already on her way to becoming someone else, someone unstoppable. And as the first ray of dawn slipped through the clouds and brushed against the empty pillow beside him, Xavier realized something he couldn't admit out loud. The sting in his chest wasn't anger or confusion. It was loss. The kind that doesn't fade with time. The kind that haunts you in boardrooms, in silence, in dreams. The kind that whispers in your ear long after the person is gone. And in that quiet moment, as the city woke beneath him, Xavier Alden, the man who thought he could buy everything, finally understood there were some things even a billionaire couldn't afford to lose. 2. 5 years had passed since that night of thunder and tears. Yet sometimes, when the rain fell just right against her window, Layla could still feel the ache of that last goodbye echoing in her chest. But the woman who now gazed into the mirror each morning was no longer the broken version of herself who had left that penthouse in pieces. She was reborn, molded by pain, strengthened by silence, and polished by every storm she had survived alone. Her reflection showed a woman of grace, smooth brown skin glowing like bronze kissed by dawn, eyes no longer heavy with sorrow, but fierce with determination. The world now knew her as Layla Monroe, CEO and founder of Ebon Essence, a global skincare empire dedicated to celebrating and empowering women of color. Her brand was more than beauty. It was her rebellion, her declaration that she would never again let anyone define her worth. Every magazine cover that bore her image, every billboard that carried her logo, was a reminder that she had risen from heartbreak to empire. Yet no one knew the full story. No one knew how many nights she'd spent working. Through tears, how many times she'd whispered to herself that she would never let her son live the life of someone forgotten. Her mornings were filled with purpose, her calendar with endless meetings, and her name had become a symbol of inspiration. But when the lights dimmed and her home grew quiet, she would often find herself pausing outside a small bedroom down the hall. Inside, a little boy's laughter filled the air, bright and healing. Micah, her son, her secret, her heartbeat. At just 5 years old, he carried the same spark in his eyes that once drew her to Xavier. A reminder of love's most painful memory, yet also its most precious gift. She would watch him sleep sometimes, brushing his curls away from his forehead, whispering silent prayers that he would never know the pain that made her this strong. To the world, she was untouchable. To Micah, she was just Mommy, his superhero in soft silk robes and morning kisses. He gave her the reason she needed to keep going when the weight of loneliness crept in at night. Still, even in success, Layla couldn't erase every ghost. Xavier's face sometimes flashed in her dreams, not as the cold man who ended their marriage, but the man who once held her hands and swore she was his future. She would wake up shaken, angry that her heart still remembered what her mind had long rejected. The newspapers occasionally mentioned his business empire. Mergers, scandals, photographs of him beside women who looked nothing like the one he lost. Each headline was like a whisper from the past, but she refused to give it power. She had built her world from ashes. She wouldn't burn it down with old flames. Instead, she poured her emotions into her work, crafting products that told stories of survival and strength. Every woman who stood before her brand felt a piece of Layla's journey, proof that beauty born from struggle could heal. That morning began like any other. The sun filtered through her sheer curtains, casting warm light across her office desk, scattered with documents and fragrance samples. The aroma of jasmine and cocoa butter lingered in the air, her favorite blend, a scent that made her feel grounded. She sipped her coffee, scrolling through her daily emails, when her assistant Naomi walked in with an envelope sealed in gold. "This just came in, Ms. Monroe," Naomi said with a smile that carried both pride and curiosity. Layla raised an eyebrow. Very few things surprised her anymore, but when she tore it open, the words printed inside made her heartbeat quicken. Invitation to the Global Business Leaders Summit, Geneva, Switzerland. It wasn't just any conference, it was the event where industry legends gathered, a place where powerful names met under one roof. Layla had dreamed of this moment, not for prestige, but for the platform to tell her story, the story of resilience, of rebuilding, of standing tall. But as she read the fine print, her fingers trembled slightly. She brushed it off quickly, convincing herself it was excitement, not anxiety. The summit was being hosted by Alden International, one of the largest investment conglomerates in the world, the same empire once ruled by the man she'd left behind. For a moment, the air left her lungs, the letters on the paper blurring slightly. Alden. The name felt like both poison and memory. She placed the envelope down carefully, her expression unreadable. Naomi continued talking about flight arrangements and speaking schedules, but Layla's mind had already drifted elsewhere, back to a penthouse she swore she'd never think about again. Was Xavier still the same? Did he ever think of her? Did he know about Micah? She shook her head sharply, forcing the thoughts away. "Book the tickets," she said calmly, "and make sure we get business class. I need to rest before I conquer another room of suits." Her tone was light, but inside something deep stirred, something she couldn't name yet. That evening, after tucking Micah into bed, Layla sat on the balcony of her minimalist apartment, overlooking the glowing city. The night breeze brushed against her braids, carrying the faint hum of jazz from a nearby rooftop bar. She looked up at the stars, the same stars that once heard her cries years ago. But now she wasn't the same woman. Her pain had become power, her silence her weapon. "We're doing okay, baby," she whispered to herself, her gaze shifting back toward the soft light spilling from Micah's room. "We're doing better than okay." Her phone buzzed beside her. Naomi again, confirming her flight details. Layla typed a simple reply, "See you at the airport." But when she hit send, her reflection on the dark glass seemed to smile back knowingly, as if fate was already setting its pieces in motion. 2 days later, at the airport, Layla walked through the terminal in a tailored ivory suit that turned heads without effort. Her aura commanded attention, but her calm eyes made people lower theirs, not out of intimidation, but reverence. Micah trotted beside her in his little denim jacket, holding her hand tightly, his laughter filling the air as he tugged at her suitcase. "Are we going to another one of your meetings, Mommy?" he asked innocently. She smiled softly. "Something like that, sweetheart." Somewhere far, far away, her assistant trailed behind, coordinating schedules. But Layla's mind was quiet, too quiet. For the first time in years, she felt a strange anticipation fluttering in her chest, as if life was leading her towards something she wasn't ready to face. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, she glanced once more at the envelope tucked into her bag, the gold seal of Alden International catching the light. Her hand lingered over it for a second, her jaw tightening before she zipped the bag closed. The past was behind her, she reminded herself. Or at least, that's what she wanted to believe. She guided Micah up the jet bridge, the hum of the engines already whispering of destinations and decisions waiting beyond the clouds. The flight attendants greeted her warmly, offering champagne and smiles, unaware of the emotional storm hidden behind her composed demeanor. She settled into her seat in business class, adjusting Micah's blanket beside her, making sure he was comfortable before she exhaled slowly and gazed out the window. The city below glowed like 1,000 broken memories stitched together in light. Layla rested her head back against the seat, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness. The journey she'd taken, from the shattered penthouse to this quiet strength, played through her mind like a movie only she could see. She was proud, but a small ache still lived somewhere deep inside her, a shadow she had learned to live with. As the plane's door began to close, her phone buzzed one last time with a message from Naomi. "Safe travels, boss. Go show them who you are." Layla smiled faintly and replied, "Always." The engines roared to life, and the jet lifted through layers of cloud, carrying her away from the world she had built and toward something unseen. As she reached for the magazine in the seat pocket, her eyes landed briefly on the logo embossed on the summit's itinerary, that familiar A swirling in gold, the insignia of Alden International. Her breath caught just slightly. She looked away, steadying herself. "You can't touch me anymore," she whispered under her breath, as if speaking to ghosts. "But the universe has a way of testing what we claim to have buried." Layla closed her eyes, unaware that fate was already rewriting her next chapter, arranging one final collision of hearts that time could not erase. As the plane soared higher into the night sky, Micah shifted beside her, curling into her side, his small hand resting over hers. Layla smiled faintly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Sleep, baby," she murmured softly. "Mama's got us." But in the silence between her words, the faint scent of a cologne drifted through the cabin, sharp, familiar, haunting. Her eyes opened slowly, her heartbeat stuttering as a shadow passed the aisle near her seat. She brushed it off, thinking it was her imagination. Little did she know, just a few seats away, the past she thought she'd left behind was about to take its first breath again. The golden dawn spilled softly through the glass walls of Heathrow Airport as Layla held Micah's tiny hand, her suitcase gliding silently beside them. The hum of early travelers, the aroma of coffee, and the quiet chaos of boarding gates formed a strange rhythm around her, but her heart beat to a different tune, one of courage, motherhood, and an unspoken ache that never seemed to fade. Dressed in a cream blazer and tailored trousers, her confidence shimmered effortlessly, commanding admiration without needing to demand it. Micah, with his curly hair and curious gaze, clutched his toy plane tightly, a small reflection of dreams bigger than his age. She bent down to fix his jacket, whispering softly, "We're chasing dreams today, baby. Remember that." Her smile hid the unease that always came when she faced the unknown, yet this time, something inside told her this flight wasn't just another business trip. It was destiny circling back in the sky. As she walked through the jet bridge, her reflection on the glass momentarily caught her, a woman reborn, no longer broken, but beautifully rebuilt. Gone was the girl who once wept in the shadows of luxury, now stood a queen of her own empire. She found her seat in business class, helping Micah settle beside her, his bright eyes fascinated by everything around him. A few passengers glanced her way, drawn by her grace. She was the kind of beauty that whispered elegance rather than shouting for attention. As the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, Layla opened her tablet, scanning through her presentation slides for the summit. Yet her mind wandered, drifting through unspoken memories. The sound of Xavier's voice the night he shattered their vows, the way his silence afterward felt louder than thunder, the years she spent proving she could rise without him. Every milestone, every success carried a ghost of his absence, but also the power of her own survival. Still, despite all her strength, there were nights she'd trace Micah's face and see Xavier in his features, those same deep brown eyes that made her heart both soften and ache. As the engines roared to life, Micah tugged her sleeve. "Mummy, do clouds smell like candy?" he asked, his innocence making her laugh softly. Maybe to dreamers, she replied, kissing his forehead. The plane began to ascend, and with every second, the ground drifted farther away, from her past, from pain, from the ashes of who she used to be. She thought she had buried those memories somewhere in the skyline, but fate, it seemed, had its own cruel sense of timing. Somewhere behind her in the boarding gate, a man in a charcoal suit had entered the same flight, his expression unreadable, his aura heavy with exhaustion and regret. Xavier Alden, the billionaire who once thought the world revolved around him, now moved through life like a ghost haunting his own success. His company still thrived, but his heart had long stopped believing in warmth. Every night he saw Layla's face in his dreams, but every morning pride forced him to pretend she never existed. He had told himself she'd moved on, maybe even found happiness, but deep down, a hollow ache whispered that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. When he boarded, his assistant murmured something about a delayed connection, but Xavier barely heard it. His eyes were weary, his mind replaying another failed deal. His empire was strong, yet he was sinking emotionally. He loosened his tie as he walked down the aisle, glancing idly at passengers, expecting nothing more than a long, quiet flight. But then, that scent, soft vanilla mixed with jasmine, drifted into his senses, stopping him mid-step. His pulse faltered. It couldn't be. His eyes searched, and the moment they landed on seat 7A, the air in his lungs turned heavy. There she was, Layla. Time hadn't just been kind to her, it had sculpted her into a vision of quiet strength and breathtaking beauty. Her hair shimmered under the cabin light, her posture poised, her aura commanding yet gentle. For a brief second, he forgot where he was. The woman he had abandoned now sat before him, more radiant than any memory could have captured. He took a step closer, heart thundering beneath his chest. His mind screamed to look away, but his soul refused to obey. Then he saw the boy beside her, the small hand clutching a toy plane, the soft curls, and those unmistakable eyes. His own eyes. His entire body went numb, disbelief anchoring him to the aisle. He blinked, as if the vision would vanish, but it didn't. The boy turned slightly, curious, his gaze meeting Xavier's with an innocent confusion that sliced deeper than any wound Xavier had ever known. He clutched the seat for balance, his throat tightening as realization struck him like lightning. Layla had a child, his child. His pulse quickened, his thoughts colliding in chaos. Years of silence suddenly had a face, a name, a truth he wasn't ready for. How could she have hidden this? Why hadn't he known? 1,000 questions surged within, but none found words. Layla felt his presence before she turned, the familiar tension in the air, the shift in energy. She didn't need to look to know. Her heart stuttered, the past crashing into the present with violent grace. Slowly she turned her head, their eyes locking for the first time in 5 years. The world outside the plane disappeared. For a heartbeat, it was only them, the woman he broke and the man she once loved beyond reason. His lips parted, but no sound came. Layla's gaze was calm, almost unreadable, yet beneath it, emotions swirled. Shock, pain, defiance. Micah looked between them, puzzled, sensing something unspoken. Xavier wanted to speak, to ask, to reach out, but his voice drowned in regret. The seatbelt light flickered on, the flight attendants moved past, and the universe seemed to whisper. Fate had finally cornered them. Layla looked away first, focusing on Micah, her hand steady as she helped him with his juice box. Her heart, however, was anything but steady. She had imagined seeing Xavier again 1,000 times, but not like this, not when she had finally built peace. His stare burned through her composure, searching for pieces of the woman he once knew. But she wasn't her anymore. When the plane leveled, he quietly took the seat across the aisle, every breath heavy with memories. His mind raced, the divorce, her tears, her words, his arrogance. He thought she'd moved on, remarried maybe, but seeing her now with his son, it tore him apart. He couldn't look away. Every small gesture, the way she tucked Micah's hair, the warmth in her eyes, reminded him of what he'd destroyed. Regret clawed its way up his chest, suffocating him. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them, a sound almost cruelly peaceful. Layla's hand brushed Micah's cheek, her heart whispering a prayer that the flight would end soon. She didn't want to reopen wounds she had stitched shut, but destiny had no intention of letting go so easily. Xavier's gaze drifted to her hand, the same hand that once wore his ring, the same hand that had written their final goodbye letter. He remembered every word of it, every tear stain. He had thrown it away back then, but its memory still lived inside him like a haunting melody. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to say something, anything, but his pride and fear tangled his tongue. He leaned back, closing his eyes, hoping for numbness, but all he saw was the little boy's eyes, his own reflection staring back at him from a smaller, purer face. Hours passed, but sleep never came. The world outside the window was a sea of clouds, vast and unreachable. Layla dozed lightly, Micah asleep on her lap, his tiny fingers curled around hers. Xavier watched them silently, the weight of years pressing on him like an invisible storm. He had thought losing deals hurt, but this was agony. Seeing her with his son, realizing how much he'd missed, the birthdays, the laughter, the milestones, shattered something inside him that money could never mend. He wanted to reach across the aisle, to whisper her name, but what right did he have now? His own choices had built this distance. His own pride had turned love into ruins. As the captain's voice announced descent, Layla stirred. Their eyes met again, a quiet war behind both gazes. She gathered Micah's bag, pretending calm, while inside her heart screamed with memories she didn't want to relive. Xavier swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Layla," he finally whispered, his voice rough, almost pleading. She paused, but didn't turn. "You look different," he added, the words lame even to his own ears. She smiled faintly, without warmth. "Time does that," she replied softly, eyes still forward. He wanted to say more, to ask about the boy, to explain, to beg for a second chance, but the plane jolted slightly, interrupting them. Layla leaned closer to Micah, fastening his seatbelt, while Xavier sat frozen, the storm brewing inside him stronger than ever. When the wheels touched down, her heart pounded. She didn't know what awaited her outside, but she knew one thing: she couldn't let the past steal her peace again. As passengers began to disembark, Xavier stood, still dazed, still wrestling with disbelief. Layla lifted Micah into her arms, her composure flawless, but her pulse racing wildly. As she turned toward the exit, Xavier reached out instinctively, his hand brushing her wrist, that familiar spark shooting through both of them, reminding them that some flames never die. Layla froze for a heartbeat, then gently pulled away, whispering, "Don't, Xavier. Not here." His heart sank at the cold finality in her tone. She walked away without looking back, her son holding her tightly. Xavier stood there, helpless, staring after her as she disappeared through the crowd, the woman he once took for granted, now untouchable, carrying the very proof of the love he threw away. And as the terminal doors closed behind her, Xavier whispered to himself, voice cracking with realization, "My God, that boy, he's mine." The hum of the plane's engines seemed to fade into nothing as Xavier's world tilted violently, the reality of what he had just seen crashing into him like a tsunami he couldn't escape. His knees buckled before he even had a chance to think, and the polished floor of the aisle rushed up to meet him, hard and unyielding. A sharp gasp escaped a nearby passenger, and then another, But Xavier didn't hear them. The only sound in his ears was the relentless pounding of his own heartbeat, each thump a painful reminder of everything he had lost. He reached out instinctively, as if grasping at the air could somehow pull him back into control, but the moment had already passed. The sight of Layla, poised, composed and radiant with their son cradled gently beside her, had disarmed him completely. His hands trembled, betraying the titan of business that everyone else in the world knew him to be. Powerless, helpless, shocked. And all at once, every decision, every cruel word, every moment he had thrown away came roaring back, blinding him. Layla froze immediately, panic slicing through her calm. For a second she considered rushing to him, even though part of her wanted to hold back. She had prepared herself for his gaze, his presence, his arrogance, but not for the sight of him collapsing in front of their son, like a man stripped entirely of the defenses he once relied upon. Her chest tightened, and the air seemed to thicken, the hum of the engines now like a low, mocking drum of fate. "Xavier!" she called instinctively, her voice trembling, even as her hands reached out toward him. Flight attendants swarmed, professional and quick, checking his pulse, adjusting his position, their faces showing concern, but also calculation. Was this stress? Was this a medical emergency? Or was it something far more complicated? Layla's eyes darted between Xavier and Micah, whose small fingers gripped her arm, his innocent gaze wide with curiosity and confusion. "Mom, who's that man?" he asked, voice tiny yet piercing, the words hanging in the cabin like a fragile bell of truth. Xavier's eyes fluttered open, hazy and disoriented, and when they focused, the first sight that anchored him back to the world was Micah. His son's face, bright, round, with eyes that mirrored his own, stared at him with unmistakable recognition, a question lodged between innocence and awe. "My son," he whispered, voice cracked, roughened by years of pride and denial. Layla's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she looked down at Micah, then back at Xavier, the air between them electric with tension. The world around them, the chatter of passengers, the hum of the plane, the soft footsteps of flight attendants, all disappeared. There was only the three of them, suspended in a bubble of disbelief and unspoken questions. Xavier's hands hovered in the air, unsure whether to reach out, to clutch, to confess, to beg. Every instinct screamed at him, go to him, touch him, never let him go again. Yet the years of silence, distance and mistakes rooted him in place. Layla, meanwhile, was a fortress of composure, though inside emotions churned wildly. Her mind raced. Do I tell him now? Do I explain 5 years of silence, hardship and love withheld? She saw the raw, vulnerable man before her, stripped of arrogance and ego, and it stirred something she thought she had buried long ago. But she also saw the pain he had caused her, the nights of tears, the betrayal that once threatened to destroy her. She inhaled sharply, steadying herself, gripping Micah's tiny hand with the strength of 1,000 promises she had made to herself over the years. He's fine, she said to the attendants, voice tight but controlled, masking the storm inside. Just give him a moment. Xavier's gaze didn't move from Micah, who now leaned slightly into Layla's side, still holding her hand. The boy's small laugh bubbled out, innocent and unknowing of the emotional storm raging before him. Xavier's chest tightened. That laugh, that smile, that simple, unfiltered joy belonged to him in ways he had never appreciated before. The realization struck with painful clarity. He had missed years of this. Every milestone, every scraped knee, every whispered bedtime story, stolen from him by his own choices, by his arrogance, by the blind pride that once ruled him. His fingers twitched, aching to touch, to hold, to apologize in ways words could never convey, but the words wouldn't come. His pride and fear tangled like vines in his throat, suffocating his voice. Layla bent slightly, brushing Micah's curls from his forehead, her movements automatic, soothing, protective. Yet her gaze never left Xavier. She could feel the tension radiating off him in palpable waves, see the guilt etched into his face like deep lines carved into stone. And for a moment, the flight, the passengers, the hum of the engines, everything faded away except the magnitude of this single, overwhelming revelation. Xavier had been powerful once, untouchable in boardrooms, in life, in love. Now he was shattered, confronting the consequences of a past he could no longer deny. And she knew, as her son's small fingers brushed her wrist, that the next few minutes could change everything, or leave the past cemented between them forever. A flight attendant knelt beside him, checking his pulse with a soft, professional voice. "Sir, you fainted from stress, but you're okay now." Xavier nodded weakly, barely registering the words. It was the shock, pure, unrelenting, the kind that no business loss, no failed deal, no personal failure could have ever prepared him for. His eyes, still locked on Micah, softened with a vulnerability Layla hadn't seen in years. "Mom, Mom," Micah asked again, tilting his head toward Xavier. Layla's chest tightened. The innocence of her son, the clarity of the question, tore through every protective wall she had built. For a fraction of a second she hesitated, unsure how much truth to reveal, how much to shield. Xavier's lips moved, silent at first. Then a whisper finally escaped. "My son." His voice trembled like a fragile reed in a storm, laden with awe, confusion, and a lifetime of regret. Layla's hands shook slightly, gripping Micah's small hand with a mixture of pride and fear. She wanted to run through everything at once, to explain, to warn, to test the waters of his heart. But she also knew that even now, 5 years later, trust wasn't something granted easily. And yet, here he was, staring at the very proof of what they had shared, the living embodiment of a love he had once destroyed. Micah, unaware of the full gravity of the moment, reached out a tiny hand toward Xavier. The gesture, simple and innocent, cut through every layer of pride and pain, leaving Xavier frozen, trembling with a mixture of hope and terror. His hands hovered over the boy, unsure whether to bridge the gap, unsure whether he deserved to. The world seemed to hold its breath. Layla's eyes darted between her son and Xavier, calculating, protecting, yet secretly aching for a bridge that might finally allow healing. Her pulse raced, every memory of the past 5 years flashing in a torrent. His cold dismissal, the night she cried, the quiet moments she promised herself she would rise. And now, the man who had once shattered her life stood weak before her, vulnerable in ways she had never imagined. Passengers whispered softly around them, sensing something monumental, though unaware of its full weight. The plane continued its steady hum, carrying them through the clouds, yet the tension in that aisle was electric, charged with years of pain, regret, and unspoken words. Xavier's hand twitched again, closer to Micah, but he froze, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the enormity of the moment. Layla inhaled slowly, heart thundering, mind racing. She could either take control, shield her son, and walk away, or she could allow the fragile tendrils of hope to thread between them, a risk she hadn't taken in 5 long years. Her mind screamed caution, but a small part of her, the part that still remembered love, leaned forward ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly. Xavier's eyes softened further, filling with tears he refused to let fall. For the first time, he saw not a woman he once thought fragile, but a mother, a queen, a force stronger than anything he had ever built. And in the mirror of his son's gaze, he saw himself, not the man he was now, but the father he could be, if only given a chance. A chance he didn't deserve, yet longed for with every fiber of his being. The plane seemed to grow quieter, the world around them fading, leaving only the 3 of them in a suspended moment of destiny. And as the plane continued onward, Layla's hand still gripping Micah's, Xavier whispered again, almost to himself, almost a prayer, My son, my son. And in that whisper, the past and future collided, leaving a crack in the ice that had encased both their hearts for 5 long years. The airport lounge felt impossibly large, yet every step Layla took carried the weight of years compressed into a heartbeat. The polished floors reflected the soft overhead lights, but for her, they reflected a labyrinth of memories she had tried so hard to bury. She sat composed, her back straight, her shoulders steady, a mask of poise and control. Yet her eyes told a different story. They were deep, swirling oceans, carrying storms of pain, betrayal, and unspoken love. Micah, unaware of the magnitude of the moment, rested quietly beside her, his tiny hand entwined in hers, a tether to reality that kept her grounded. The world outside moved in a blur. Business people, travelers, airport announcements. But inside her bubble, time had slowed, stretching each second into eternity. Across from her, Xavier stood frozen, the remnants of his usual arrogance stripped bare, leaving only a man utterly exposed to the consequences of his past. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each inhale laced with regret, each exhale tinged with disbelief. The bustling lounge faded into a background hum, replaced by the thunder of memories pounding in his mind. He saw her again, the woman he had once promised forever, now tempered by fire and pain, radiant and untouchable. He wanted to speak, to bridge the chasm of 5 long years, but his words died in his throat. All he could do was stare, guilt flooding every line of his face, turning the man who had once commanded boardrooms into someone utterly powerless. Layla's eyes met his for a fleeting moment, a spark, a warning, a memory of nights spent crying alone, and he felt the weight of every unspoken apology, every chance he had squandered. "You left me with no choice," Layla said finally, her voice calm yet resonant, each word carrying the echo of nights when she had wept silently in the darkness. Her tone was not shrill, not demanding, but precise, carved with years of survival and self-preservation. She held Micah's hand firmly, grounding herself, drawing strength from the boy who was as much a part of her as the pain she carried. Xavier's lips parted, the silence of the moment pressing like a vice around him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, barely a whisper, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock, guilt, and the beginnings of desperation. The words seemed too simple for the complex emotions twisting inside him, yet they spilled out, unpolished, unpracticed, raw. Layla's gaze didn't waver, but her voice carried the weight of centuries in its calmness. "Because you didn't care to listen," she said softly, each syllable sharper than any accusation he could have endured. The statement hung in the air, reverberating through the lounge like a bell tolling over still waters. Xavier flinched as though struck by invisible force. Each memory of that night, each cruel word he had spoken, each moment of indifference he had displayed, replayed in his mind like a relentless curse. The echoes of her sobs, the hollow spaces he had left in her life, the silence that had stretched between them, all converged in a storm he was ill-prepared to face. For a moment, he saw the years he had stolen, the love he had destroyed, and he wanted desperately to undo it all. He moved a step closer, but she remained seated, immovable as a statue of marble carved from pain and dignity. He longed to apologize, to take her hand, to hold her, to whisper that he had changed, but he knew, even in that instant, that words could not undo what had been done. Her composure was infuriating, beautiful, and painful all at once. "We've both moved on," she said finally, standing, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed the deepest currents of her emotion. Her gaze, though calm, held a torrent of betrayal, longing, and unhealed scars. Every step she took away from him was a knife twisting in his chest, and yet he couldn't stop her. The crowd around them blurred further, as if the universe itself had drawn a veil around the two of them. Xavier reached out instinctively, the air between them charged with unspoken desire and unacknowledged regret. But she didn't turn back. Her focus remained on Micah, on herself, on the fortress of strength she had built over half a decade. Yet, her back wasn't entirely cold. There was a flicker, a hesitation, a hint that beneath the layers of pain, love had not entirely perished. Xavier's fingers trembled, hanging mid-air, grasping at nothing, reaching for a bridge that seemed impossible to cross. He realized then that this was not just a reunion. It was a reckoning. The universe had placed them in the same space, but the question now was whether fate would allow redemption, or whether history would repeat itself in merciless silence. Micah, sensing tension he could not fully comprehend, tugged lightly at Layla's sleeve. The innocence in his eyes contrasted sharply with the intensity of the moment, and it was this contrast that pierced Xavier more profoundly than words could. He remembered every moment he had missed, first steps, first words, first laughter, and the enormity of his loss crushed him from within. Layla noticed the flicker of recognition and emotion crossing his face, but she didn't allow herself to soften. Not yet. The child's hand in hers was her anchor, and his presence reminded her of the reason she had survived, thrived, and remained unbroken. Xavier's voice, rough with emotion, broke through again. I never meant for any of this. I never knew. His sentence faltered, a fragment lost in the storm of regret. Layla's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard variations of these words before, promises, excuses, confessions, and she had learned the hard way that sincerity alone could not undo years of pain. She turned slightly, keeping her eyes averted from him, focusing instead on Micah, whose small hand remained entwined with hers. "The past is the past," she said softly, yet firmly. "We survive. We endure. That's what matters now." For a moment, Xavier remained rooted, staring at her, at their son, at the life that had continued without him. He felt powerless, stripped of his usual tools, charm, wealth, influence. None of it mattered here. What mattered was the truth in front of him. Layla had moved forward. She had grown. She had loved and protected the boy he had created, and she had done it without him. Every instinct inside him screamed to chase her, to reclaim what he had lost, to beg for forgiveness, to somehow restart the clock. But every fiber of his being knew that he would have to earn it, not demand it. Layla adjusted Micah in her lap, her eyes scanning the lounge briefly, then settling back on Xavier. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible softness in her gaze now, a tiny crack in the armor she had built, but it was fleeting. It was enough to ignite a fire in Xavier that had lain dormant for years, a fire of desire, regret, and determination. His chest tightened, and he realized in that moment that he would never allow her to leave again, not without a fight, not without truth. As she started walking toward the gate, leaving him standing amidst the neutral tones of the airport lounge, Xavier's hand shot out instinctively, a desperate, almost uncontrollable gesture. His eyes burned with a mixture of longing and fear. "Layla!" he called, voice hoarse, raw, but she didn't turn. She only walked, each step deliberate, carrying the weight of 5 years of pain and resilience. And in that stride, Xavier understood something profound. Love alone was not enough. Trust had to be rebuilt, redemption had to be earned, and the path ahead would be far more treacherous than any boardroom battle he had ever faced. The airport lights flickered across the polished floor as she disappeared into the crowd, Micah clinging gently to her hand. Xavier stood frozen, the echo of her words and her calm defiance resonating inside him like a relentless drum. "I won't lose you again," he whispered, barely audible over the distant announcements and chatter, yet to himself, to the universe, and to the past he had destroyed. He knew in the marrow of his bones that destiny had already begun to weave the next chapter, and that this time he could not falter. And as the lounge slowly emptied, the world around them moved on. But in that small pocket of fate, hearts remained suspended, poised on the knife edge of unspoken truths, unresolved pain, and the first glimmers of a redemption yet to come. The days that followed Layla's departure from the airport lounge were a blur for Xavier. The boardroom, once his sanctuary of control, felt suffocating, meaningless, a hollow stage where his power had no purchase. He sat in his office, glass walls showcasing the city beneath, yet all he could see was her face, the curve of her smile, the intensity in her eyes, the composed elegance that had always made him feel simultaneously drawn and inferior. Meetings passed like shadows, colleagues' voices muffled by the pounding of his own thoughts. Every silence reverberated with echoes of her words, her unyielding calm, her refusal to crumble even in the face of him, the man who had once promised forever and then shattered it. The memory tormented him. The way she had clasped Micah's hand, the way she had looked at him with a quiet storm raging behind her eyes. Unable to endure the torment of his own mind, Xavier did what he had always done in crises. He sought information, control, evidence. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional accustomed to navigating the hidden lives of the wealthy. He needed to know, who was she now? What had she become in the absence of him? The answer hit harder than any failed merger, any public scandal, any financial collapse he had ever endured. Layla had flourished. Ebon Essence had become more than a company. It was a movement, a symbol of empowerment for women who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Magazine covers displayed her radiant beauty, interviews highlighted her resilience, speeches echoed her voice as a force of inspiration. She had risen without him, built everything without his name, without his influence, and every revelation tore at his pride while igniting a dangerous awe. He sent flowers first, extravagant bouquets that whispered apologies he couldn't yet voice. Letters followed, penned in his familiar, precise hand, each word painstakingly crafted to convey remorse, longing, and recognition of his failings. He hoped they would reach her, that they would pierce her calm, that they might remind her of what they had once shared. None were opened, not a single response came. The silence burned hotter than any confrontation could, a slow, relentless fire consuming the man who had never truly understood absence until it hit him in the form of his lost family. The frustration twisted him further, igniting an obsession he couldn't quell. Every night he imagined her with Micah, laughing, walking, living a life he had no part in, and every scenario sharpened the ache in his chest. One evening, unable to bear the inaction, Xavier found himself parked across from Layla's office, hidden behind the sleek black tint of his luxury sedan. The street was quiet, the city's hustle dimmed in the twilight, and there she was, a vision of composed grace exiting the building with Micah's hand in hers. The sight stabbed him deeper than any financial loss, any professional betrayal. They looked complete, perfect in ways he could no longer claim. Layla's stride was confident, controlled, radiating a power that seemed to mock his own emptiness. And yet, beneath the surface, he saw a tenderness, a depth reserved only for her son that no amount of money, influence, or regret could buy. His chest tightened, a visceral physical ache. He had glimpsed heaven and hell simultaneously, both embodied in her calm figure and the small boy's effortless joy. Through the tinted glass of his car, their eyes met for the briefest instant. Layla's gaze was steady, piercing through the barrier of distance, composed but unyielding. Xavier felt the intensity as a sharp blow, as if she had reached into the very marrow of his being and stripped him bare of pretense. For a moment he thought she might turn away, dismiss him, recognize him only as the man who had caused pain and nothing more. But there was no fear, no tremor, only the quiet acknowledgement that he was seeing what he had lost, the tangible, living proof of his mistakes. And then, in a moment of pure, unguarded innocence, Micah raised his small hand and waved at him, unaware of the storm unfolding in the adult world around him. That small, effortless gesture shattered Xavier's remaining composure. His heart cracked in ways that wealth, power, or pride could never mend. He watched them walk down the street, Layla's hand firmly holding Micah's, the boy's laughter spilling into the evening air. Every step reminded him of time stolen, moments he could never retrieve. The more he watched, the more the fire inside him burned. Not anger, not vengeance, but raw, desperate longing. He realized painfully that he would do anything to bridge the chasm that had grown between them, anything to reclaim even a fragment of what he had destroyed. Yet he also understood the gravity of the task. He had no right, no guarantee, only the faint hope that fate might bend in his favor once again. Days turned into nights filled with restless pacing, sleepless hours staring out over the cityscape, haunted by images of her and Micah. Every meeting, every negotiation, every trivial concern became a hollow distraction. The private investigators' reports revealed more. Layla's rise was meteoric, her influence expansive. She was not only surviving without him, she was thriving, radiant, a beacon of determination and grace. The realization was both intoxicating and devastating. She was beyond his reach, yet he could not tear his thoughts away from her. Every plan he devised, every strategy he considered, centered not on business, but on approaching her, understanding her, regaining what he had lost. Finally, one night, driven by compulsion he could not resist, Xavier parked near her apartment building. From the shadows, he watched as she emerged, carrying a briefcase and holding Micah's hand. The boy's small laughter punctuated the night air, and Xavier felt a pang that reverberated to his very core. He noticed every detail, the confident swing of her step, the soft glint of her earrings, the calm, almost imperceptible smile she directed at her son. It was a life built without him, and yet it was beautiful, undeniable, and utterly unattainable unless he acted, carefully, strategically, and with the humility he had never known before. Xavier's mind raced. He thought of the apologies he had sent, the letters, the flowers, the words never received. He considered what he could say, how he could approach her without frightening her, without pushing her further away. And yet the sight of Micah's innocent smile, mirrored from his own childhood reflection, made the stakes painfully clear. Every second he hesitated was another second of life that he would never reclaim. The wind brushed against the car window as he watched them disappear down the street, their figures framed by the amber glow of the streetlights. His chest ached, a deep, unrelenting ache, fueled by longing, remorse, and a desperate need to make amends. The world seemed impossibly vast, and yet claustrophobically small, the distance between them both measurable and immeasurable, tangible and yet elusive. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with difficulty. A man who had destroyed a life did not simply reclaim it with words. He had to prove, to act, to atone, and even then there was no certainty. And yet, amidst the ache, the longing, the heartbreak, there was a spark, fragile but undeniable. Hope. The hope that Layla might one day look at him not as the man who abandoned her, but as the man who would stop at nothing to reclaim what truly mattered. Xavier's jaw tightened, resolve forming in the depths of his chest. He would not rest. He would not falter. He would burn through the regrets that had consumed him until she and their son were once again in his life, on his terms, and with his heart fully committed. In that quiet night as the city slept around him, Xavier whispered into the dark, "I will not fail again. Not her, not him. Not us, the promise. spoken to the wind, carried the weight of every loss, every tear, every lonely night. And somewhere deep in that promise lay the truth, that love, when tempered by time, mistakes, and longing, could either destroy or redeem. Xavier was determined it would be the latter. A week had passed since Xavier had watched Layla and Micah walk away from him, and the memory haunted him relentlessly. Every waking moment had been consumed by thoughts of her, the way she carried herself, the grace with which she navigated the world without him, and the fierce protective love she exuded for their son. Tonight, however, fate had conspired to bring them back together. The corporate gala was extravagant, a celebration of achievements and power, but for Xavier, it became a stage where past regrets and present desires collided. The grand ballroom glimmered under cascading chandeliers, every crystal prism reflecting light and shadow alike, a reflection perhaps of the tangled emotions now enveloping him. He had arrived early, his tailored suit impeccable, but his mind was restless, and his eyes continually scanned the crowd, not for business opportunities, but for her presence. When Layla entered, the world shifted. She moved with the same elegance he had once adored, yet now there was an aura of invincibility, a strength forged from years of surviving without him. Her gown hugged her form gracefully, understated yet impossibly commanding, her dark skin glowing under the soft chandelier light, and her eyes, as always, told stories he could no longer read easily. She didn't look at him immediately, absorbed in her own interactions, exchanging greetings and warm smiles with colleagues, all of it performed with the poise of a woman who had rebuilt a kingdom from the ashes he had left behind. And yet, when her gaze finally swept the room and met his, time faltered. The noise of laughter, conversation, and clinking glasses faded into a distant murmur. In that moment, there was only the weight of 5 years suspended between them, unspoken words pressing like stones on his chest. "You've changed," he said softly when he finally found her, the words slipping out before he could weigh them. His voice was low, carrying a mix of awe, regret, and a tentative hope he barely dared to acknowledge. Layla's eyes flickered, glistening faintly under the light as if memories had surfaced unbidden. "Pain does that," she replied, each word calm but laced with unforgotten sorrow. There was no accusation, no venom, merely a truth he recognized all too well. He had once underestimated the depths of her resilience, and now he was confronted with the consequences of that error. The space between them seemed charged, a delicate tension poised to shatter with the slightest provocation. Xavier's hand hovered near hers, trembling imperceptibly, yet the desire to bridge the gap was overwhelming. He wanted to reach across, to take her hand and anchor himself to the possibility of forgiveness, yet he feared the fragility of the moment. Finally, his confession poured out, halting, desperate, each word an attempt to undo the years of silence. "I have been alone," he began, voice cracking. "Lonely in ways I never understood before. I have regretted every moment I let slip away, every cruel word I said, every choice I made that hurt you. No one has ever filled the void you left, Layla. I have tried, and I have failed. I have lived in the echo of your absence, and it has been a torment I would not wish on anyone." His hands twitched, yearning for the courage to physically reach for her, to make her understand the depth of his despair. Layla's heart trembled at the vulnerability, yet forgiveness was not a garment she could put on at will. She had rebuilt herself, her empire, and her sense of self. She had endured betrayal and heartbreak and emerged whole, though scarred. "You destroyed us," she whispered, her voice soft but cutting, carrying the weight of history and heartbreak. "And now you want to rebuild on ashes." Each word was measured, each syllable carefully chosen, a test of his sincerity, a barrier to ensure he had truly understood the magnitude of his actions. Xavier's chest tightened. Her words were sharper than any financial defeat he had endured, yet he welcomed the sting, for it proved she was still human, still capable of feeling, still capable of connection. He reached for her hand then, desperate, trembling, his fingers brushing the back of her palm in a tentative plea. "Let me try," he implored, voice raw and urgent. "For our son. For what we once had, and could still have. I am not the man I was. I will not make the same mistakes. I cannot undo the past, but I can fight for the future, for us, for him, for everything we lost." His eyes searched hers, pleading for a glimmer of hope, a sign that she might still remember the man beneath the arrogance, beneath the pride, beneath the cruelty he had once worn as armor. Her silence was more powerful than any rejection. It lingered, heavy and accusatory, drawing him into its gravity. The hum of the gala, music, laughter, conversations, all seemed to fade beneath the intensity of that quiet. Xavier felt exposed, stripped of all defenses, as if every wall he had built to protect himself had crumbled. He saw the storm behind her eyes, the memories that she had so carefully shielded, and he understood the enormity of the task before him. Every step toward reconciliation would be uphill, every word measured against the weight of his failures. Yet he could not retreat, he could not allow fear to hold him back. As Layla began to rise, adjusting the elegant line of her gown, preparing to leave the dinner and the confrontation behind, Xavier's voice cut through the space between them. "I still love you," he declared, louder this time. A declaration not just to her, but to the universe, to their past, to the boy who had unknowingly anchored their fates together. The words were raw, unpolished, imbued with every ounce of longing and regret he had carried for half a decade. Her hand paused mid-motion, a faint hesitation betraying the imperceptible shift within her. The pause was infinitesimal, yet it carried worlds. The delicate balance of forgiveness, hope, and fear. For a fleeting heartbeat, the possibility hung in the air. Could love survive after such devastation? Could trust be rebuilt when the foundation had been so violently shattered? Xavier watched her carefully, heart hammering, every nerve alive with anticipation, knowing that in this suspended moment, the future of their relationship and of their son teetered on the edge of her decision. Around them, the gala continued, oblivious to the intimate battle unfolding at the center of the room. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the polished floors, each reflection an echo of the memories, the pain, and the possibility of redemption. Xavier's hands flexed with silent desperation, his gaze unwavering from hers, reading every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. Layla's chest rose and fell slowly, carefully, measured, as if weighing the cost of letting the past intrude upon the fragile present. In that charged silence, a tension thicker than any storm surrounded them, and Xavier realized with painful clarity that love alone might not suffice. He had to earn her trust, prove his change, demonstrate that the man before her now was fundamentally different from the man who had left her in ruins. And yet he could not suppress the flicker of hope that surged within him. Hope born of their shared past, their son's innocent presence, and the unmistakable recognition in her eyes that something unbroken still lingered between them. And so, in the glow of chandeliers, amidst the swirl of laughter and music, the world held its breath. Two souls, scarred yet unbroken, stood at the precipice of possibility. The past loomed like a shadow, heavy and inescapable, but for the first time in years, Xavier felt the spark of something he had long thought lost, the chance to reclaim love, to bridge the chasm of regret, and to confront the ashes of their history with courage, humility, and hope. 8. The gala had ended hours ago, but the echo of Xavier's words lingered in Layla's mind like a persistent, insistent echo she could not silence. She returned to her penthouse, her footsteps silent against the polished marble floors, her reflection in the hallway mirrors fragmented yet unmistakable. A woman of strength, of power, but one still tethered to the ghosts of a love she had tried to bury. Lying in the darkness of her bedroom, she stared at the ceiling, wide awake, the chandelier's soft glow casting delicate shadows that danced like memories she could not unsee. Every word he had spoken at the dinner, every confession of loneliness, regret, and unspoken longing played in a relentless loop. She tried to will it away, tried to tell herself she had moved on, that the life she had built for herself and Micah was enough, but the storm inside her refused to abate. She rose quietly and stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The city stretched endlessly before her, glittering lights reflecting the possibilities and betrayals of a past she had fought to leave behind. Each car that passed, each distant laugh or faint music from below seemed to echo a rhythm that pulsed in tandem with her heartbeat. A heartbeat she could no longer claim as solely hers, as it still carried the mark of Xavier's presence. In the silence, she tried to remember herself before him, before heartbreak, before betrayal. But every memory returned with him in the center, his voice lingering in her ears, his face burned into her mind with an intensity that refused to fade. Then her phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. She started, her fingers trembling as she saw the message light up the screen. "Meet me where it all began." Her breath caught. Against every instinct, against every warning that reason screamed at her, something deep inside, the part of her that still remembered, that still longed, compelled her to go. She hesitated, the night stretching before her like a vast, uncertain ocean, but the pull was irresistible. With Micah asleep upstairs, she grabbed her coat and stepped into the chill. The rain beginning to fall gently, as if the heavens themselves had conspired to cloak her journey in cinematic urgency. The cafe where they first met came into view, familiar and unassuming, yet charged with memories of laughter, first glances, and shared vulnerability. Xavier was there, standing alone in the rain, drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, clothes clinging to his frame, a man stripped of pretense, of power, of the arrogance that had once defined him. He looked smaller somehow, humbled by the gravity of the years lost, yet more compelling, more human than she had ever seen him. When their eyes met across the empty street, the world seemed to vanish, leaving only the tension of what had been, what was, and what might still be. "I don't deserve another chance," he said, his voice carrying over the soft rain, raw and fractured, the vulnerability in it making her chest tighten. "But I'll spend my life proving I've changed." Every word trembled on the edge of truth, and every syllable pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. She wanted to speak, to question, to push him away, yet her body betrayed her, frozen by the power of his presence and the sincerity in his eyes. The rain fell harder now, soaking both of them, and yet it felt like a cleansing, a baptism of emotions too long suppressed, too long denied. Her throat was tight, words failing her, tears mixing with the rain and cascading down her cheeks, blurring her vision yet sharpening every sensation. She saw him not as the man who had abandoned her, but as the man who had loved fiercely, who had lost, and who was now standing here willing to strip himself bare in the hope of redemption. She wanted to recoil, to retreat, to remind herself of every harsh word, every cold night, every moment of neglect. But then she saw Micah emerge from behind the cafe door, tiny steps splashing through the puddles, his laughter ringing like a bell. "Dad!" the boy shouted, recognition and excitement lighting up his innocent face. And just like that, Layla's walls, built high over 5 years of solitude and control, began to crumble. She watched as Xavier's expression transformed instantly, shock, disbelief, then an overwhelming rush of love that shook him to his core. He bent low to meet his son, tears mingling with rain, laughter bubbling through the pain, every unspoken regret expressed in the gentle way he reached out his arms. Micah ran to him without hesitation, completely unguarded, completely trusting, and in that moment, all of Xavier's fears, all of his doubts, all of his pride dissolved into a tidal wave of raw emotion. Layla felt her heart breaking and healing at once, a paradox of grief and joy that left her trembling. She wanted to speak, to demand explanations, to hold on to the control she had fought so hard to reclaim. But she couldn't. Every instinct to protect herself, to shield her heart, was overpowered by the sight of them together. The man who had once been her world, and the child who carried his image so completely. The rain drummed against the cafe roof, the night air thick with electricity and unspoken promises, and she realized that this moment, chaotic, unexpected, drenched in the storm, was precisely the confrontation with destiny she had tried to avoid. Xavier, his arms wrapped around Micah, looked up at her, drenched but unashamed, a figure transformed by loss and longing. "Layla," he whispered, voice trembling, not demanding, not pleading, but simply acknowledging her presence and the life she had built in defiance of him. The intensity in his eyes, the rawness of his emotion, left her breathless, teetering on the edge of surrender. She had never witnessed him like this, vulnerable, exposed, human, and it both terrified and captivated her. The cafe's interior lights glimmered faintly through the rain-soaked windows, illuminating the tableau outside like a painting in motion. Time seemed to stretch, compress, then halt altogether. Every drop of rain that touched her skin was a reminder of the storm they had survived, the storm that had shaped them, and the storm that was now leading them toward a confrontation neither could escape. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every shiver of anticipation was amplified by the closeness of the man she had once loved and the boy who was their living testament. And as Micah clung to Xavier, laughing and chattering, Layla's resistance melted like ice under sunlight. She felt herself moving closer, letting the years of pain and betrayal wash away in the storm, allowing herself to witness the man who had returned not with arrogance, but with humility and love. She stepped into the rain closer until she was finally part of the moment. A woman strong yet tender, a mother, a partner, a lover waiting for the dawn. The walls she had built fell completely, leaving only truth, raw and undeniable. That love, when confronted by loss and longing, could return with a force that neither time nor betrayal could diminish. In that rain-soaked night, with the city asleep around them and the storm echoing their hearts, Xavier and Layla stood together at the precipice of a new beginning. And for the first time in 5 long years, she allowed herself to hope, to breathe, to feel, and to believe that this time nothing could pull them apart. The storm raged around them, but within it, a fragile, luminous promise had been reborn. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, the air crisp and salty with the scent of the sea. Months had come and gone since that rain-soaked night at the cafe, yet the memory remained vivid, etched into both Layla and Xavier's hearts, as the moment that had rekindled a love they had feared lost forever. Now, far from the chaos of the city, they walked hand in hand along a secluded stretch of beach, the sand warm beneath their feet, the gentle waves lapping at the shore as if celebrating the fragile, hard-won peace between them. Xavier, his jacket slung over his arm, moved with a new lightness, unburdened by the weight of an empire he had once believed defined him. He had left the world of boardrooms, mergers, and endless meetings behind, trading it for a life centered on love, family, and the joy of watching their son grow. Layla's heart, once fragile and scarred by betrayal, now beat with a steady rhythm of quiet strength. She had healed slowly, each day a step toward forgiveness, each moment spent with Xavier a reminder that the man she had feared had changed, Not overnight, not by chance, but through suffering, reflection, and the undeniable pull of love that refused to be extinguished. As she looked at him now, every harsh memory, every tear, every sleepless night seemed to melt away in the warmth of the morning sun, revealing the man who could have been all along, the man who now stood beside her with humility and devotion. She could feel the depth of his change in every gesture, the gentle way he brushed a strand of hair from Micah's face, the patient humor with which he encouraged the boy to chase seagulls, the soft, unassuming way he held her hand as they walked together, blending past mistakes into a tapestry of hope and renewal. Micah's laughter carried across the waves, pure and unrestrained, his small feet kicking up sand as he chased the birds that darted along the shoreline. Xavier's eyes followed his son with a tenderness that had never existed in his former life of power and wealth. Watching the boy run, entirely unself-conscious and filled with the boundless joy of childhood, Xavier felt a surge of gratitude that pierced him deeply. Gratitude for the second chance, for the forgiveness Layla had granted, for the family that had been reclaimed from the ashes of pain. "You know," Xavier whispered, his voice soft yet heavy with emotion, "the divorce was the worst mistake of my life." The words, though simple, carried years of regret, reflection, and a longing for a future he had once thought impossible. Layla looked at him, her eyes reflecting the gold and pink hues of the rising sun, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. "And loving you was the hardest lesson of mine," she said, her voice calm yet layered with meaning, a testament to the journey she had endured. A journey from heartbreak to healing, from despair to trust, from solitude to the warmth of a rekindled love. Her hand found his, pressing it gently against her heart, as if to anchor both herself and him to the present, to the new life they were building together. Every heartbeat, every pulse, was a declaration that the past no longer held dominion over them, that forgiveness and love could coexist in perfect harmony, and that the mistakes of yesterday had become the lessons that guided their future. They continued walking, the sand soft beneath their steps, the ocean's waves washing over their footprints and erasing the traces of past transgressions. Xavier glanced at Layla, the sunlight highlighting the gentle curve of her jaw, the quiet strength in her posture, the beauty that had grown from pain into resilience. He marveled at the woman she had become, not merely the woman he had loved, but a goddess of her own making, empowered, radiant, and unyielding in the face of adversity. "Layla," he said, voice catching slightly, "I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you, that I can honor everything you are and everything we have. I can never undo the past, but I swear, from this moment onward, I will devote myself to our family, to our love, and to the happiness of our son." Her eyes softened, shimmering with unshed tears that reflected both relief and hope. She had carried the weight of his betrayal for years, yet now she recognized the sincerity that radiated from him, the authenticity in his tone, the humility in his posture, and the unwavering gaze that spoke of a man transformed. Slowly, she nodded, letting her body relax, letting her heart release the years of tension and grief she had carried. "Xavier," she whispered, "I will walk this path with you. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because we have survived it. We have chosen each other again, freely, consciously, and with all the love we possess. This time, we build on truth, on understanding, and on forgiveness." Micah ran up to them, his small hands reaching for theirs, bridging the bond between past and future in a simple, perfect gesture. He tugged on Xavier's hand and then Layla's, spinning between them, laughter echoing like music over the waves. Xavier bent down, scooping his son into his arms, holding him close, feeling the warmth, the life, the embodiment of their shared love. Layla stepped forward, joining the embrace, and together they formed a small, perfect circle, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of the ocean. For a moment, time held its breath. The past dissolved. The future shimmered with promise, and the present became infinite. The sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold, reflecting on the water like molten fire, illuminating every emotion etched on their faces. Xavier gently pressed his lips to Layla's forehead, a kiss not of urgent passion but of peace, of reverence, of the quiet affirmation that what they had now was sacred, hard-earned, and eternal. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun, the love in his gesture, and the laughter of their child wash over her, sealing the moment as a memory that would never fade. The waves whispered promises, the seagulls called in celebration, and the world seemed to pause in acknowledgement of their reunion. They walked along the beach for hours, the conversation flowing easily now, laughter mingling with shared memories, gentle teasing, and long silences that spoke volumes of trust and comfort. Xavier held her hand, occasionally brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, while Layla rested her head briefly on his shoulder, feeling the steady strength she had longed for and finally found. Every glance, every touch, every word confirmed the unspoken truth. They were not the same people who had faltered and failed before. They had been tempered by pain, forged by distance, and refined by love, and now nothing could sever the bond that had been so fiercely reclaimed. As the sun climbed higher, casting a warm, golden light over the sand and surf, Layla looked at Xavier with clarity and certainty. "This is our life," she said softly, simple, honest, and full of love. "Nothing else matters," Xavier smiled, pressing his lips to hers gently, tasting the sweetness of forgiveness and the weight of promises fulfilled. "Forever," he murmured, "this time, forever." And so, on that quiet, sunlit beach, a family that had been broken and battered finally found completion. The pain of the past had shaped them, the trials of separation had refined them, and the power of forgiveness had healed them. Xavier, Layla, and Micah stood together, hearts entwined, eyes on the horizon, the sunrise reflecting not just the dawn of a new day, but the dawn of a life rebuilt on love, trust, and enduring devotion. For the first time in years, Layla smiled freely, unburdened, at peace, knowing that this love, tested, tried, and triumphant, would never again be lost. And as the waves kissed their feet and the sun bathed them in golden light, forever finally meant forever. Wow. What an emotional journey. Did Xavier finally get his second chance? Did Layla's heart truly heal? Their story reminds us that love, forgiveness, and destiny have a way of finding us, even when we think all hope is lost. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond Color Stories for more unforgettable tales of love, heartbreak, and redemption. And remember, every ending can be a new beginning, so stay tuned for our next story that will capture your heart all over again.